What's going on, guys? It is absolutely 100% miserable outside. 35, 40 mile an hour wind and sideways rain. So I had a musky morning today. I had a phenomenal musky morning today. Caught a bunch of quality fish. But I wanted to film a video today. Wanted to go back out fishing. It's just too bad outside to even really fish and to get a decent film on top of it. So how do we film something today that's educational, entertaining, or on the lower end of entertaining maybe? We'll have to see where this goes. But mainly educational for you guys. You know, I always want you guys to take something away from the videos we do. So the biggest question I get asked, whether it's on a YouTube video, on a Facebook message, on a guide trip, at a seminar, whatever it is always about the Humminbird sonar, side imaging, down imaging stuff. What do fish look like? What do rocks look like? What do cribs look like? Everything like that. So, you know, we're gonna kind of play a little bit of a game here that's hopefully educational for you guys. So throughout the year, whenever I see something unique or see something I want to remember to use down the road, either in a video or for something like this, I guess, I take a screenshot with my Humminbird. And it's very simple to do as long as you have a card in your graph, which most guys do, have a Lake Master chip in there. When you go to basically, if you want to screenshot something off your graph, throw it on your computer or whatever, basically all you do is instead of just hitting the mark button like you would to like drop a waypoint, just hold it down on your Helix unit, and that's gonna capture a screenshot for you. So we're gonna go through, I've kind of created like a PowerPoint. We're gonna kind of go through 10 slides, and I'm gonna show you guys what I see on the graph, whether that's fish or structure or whatever it is. And we're gonna kind of do some information like, you know, would I troll these fish? Would I cast these fish? Would I slip bobber these fish? Stuff like that. So we're gonna get right into it. Hopefully you guys like this. You know, leave some comments below if you like this format, because they're super easy to do, and we can do a whole bunch of these because it's super easy and very non-time consuming. So number one, here it is. This is a screenshot I took on the Great Lakes in Sturgeon Bay. So these are all, let's just say this first, these are all basically walleye screenshots pertaining to walleye, right? So I took this screenshot in Sturgeon Bay. You can see, the first thing you can see is right here going this way. This is all solid rock. So my boat is actually shallower than where we're planning on fishing. And a lot of times you're fishing these rock transitions. These rock transitions are not always this clear. As far as just being totally rock free on this side, a lot of times it'll be like heavy rock here like you see right on this side, and then scattered rock through here, which will make it tougher to see fish. But this spot in particular, or if you guys have this on your lakes, or just a lot of sand bottoms, obviously super easy to see fish on side imaging. So yes, I run mega imaging. These are from the Helix Gen 3's mega imaging plus, I think it's called, or something. But here we have a real obvious fish. You can see the head of the fish, you can see the tail of the fish. Same thing over here, you got another fish here. And the reason these rocks look like they're so long like this is because I'm going super slow. I'm working this spot at this moment with my trolling motor, you know, and I can visually see fish going by me, which is always really cool. You know, because it basically lets you know, oh, cast right there, cast over here, you know. And if you're working a spot like this, like you can see, I always like to cast off my left, so I can envision my boat going down the spot like this. The shoreline's right behind me, and I'm casting out to this transition line. So these fish are right out here. Super obvious that these are walleyes. And you know, one thing you can do, like let's say this isn't right next to shore and you're trying to follow something like this. You know, a lot of times, let's say you're casting this from the other side. Well, what you can do is you can take this and you can basically run your graph, like let's say you set it at 90 feet. Or you could set it even less, because most of the time you're fishing a transition, you can assume that these fish are going to be pretty tight to that transition. At least that's where you want them to be. So you could basically run, you know, if you're casting off the left side of your boat, you know, like I have it here, half my graph on the left side is rock and the other half is sand. So I know that basically the close, I'm not going to catch a fish, you know, 5 feet off the left side of my boat. I want to keep those fish kind of in that sweet spot out there where my jig's still doing some good stuff and it's not necessarily like coming up at me yet, if that makes sense. So a lot of times you can kind of use side imaging to work down a spot like this and follow these kind of transitions. You know, obviously when you're marking fish on sand like this right here, they're going to be super obvious. You can see my boat is sitting in 9 feet. The water was 40 degrees and this was almost at 8 p.m. I believe, or maybe it was 8 a.m. I do not recall on this exact day. But you know, super obvious fish here is the main thing to note. The second thing to note is that they're sitting on a rock to sand transition, which basically is a super easy pattern to replicate because it's super easy to mark a rock to sand transition. And especially if fish are sitting on the sand, they're gonna be super easy to see on that edge. So that's kind of what I'm seeing there. You know, how would we fish for these fish? Well, they're in 9 feet of water. You could troll them if you got enough wind out there, but most of the time on this day what we were doing is popping jigs and plastics kind of right. We were casting actually out to about 15 feet of water, which is kind of the outside edge of this graph, kind of over this way, and we were bringing them back up that break and catching those fish that were right on that transition there, and we were popping jigs and plastics and probably some rip and wraps as well. So, all right, so picture number 2 here, what are we looking at? So it's obvious that there's a lot of sand here. This is a very sandy spot, and we actually filmed a video this day on a Hayward area lake fishing slip bobbers and snap jigging very shallow. So the main thing we can see here, besides just a lot of plain sand with no fish on it, is a little pod of weeds right here. And you can see they're pretty thick because they're throwing out a bunch of these long shadows. And you can see here you lose these long shadows because there's no weeds there. So that's basically what a real thick weed bed would show. It's not throwing like so much of a shadow where it's like just black for this void right here. So you can see through it a little bit. And this weed is actually mostly cabbage and some milfoil mixed in. And it's a real small pocket right here. So, you know, there's no point in fishing right here. There's no point in fishing right here. The only spot we are interested in fishing is right on this weed pocket. And you can see how there's fish relating to this. So you can actually see fish right, a few of them right in the weeds. Like that's probably a fish there. That's probably a fish there, fish here, fish there, fish here, fish here. So there's kind of a number of fish relating very close to this weed pocket right here. So I'm not gonna do something like troll through these fish, obviously, right? It's 13 feet deep, water temp's almost 80. So this is definitely like a middle of summer scenario here. And it's such a small area that it's not gonna be worth doing anything like trolling or just, you know, generally firing a crankbait a mile or something like that. I wanna pick apart this very small area, which I'm doing something like that, especially if it's in the middle of summer. A bobber is just tough to beat. And that's exactly what we were doing this day. We were spot locking, like let's say we had a wind that was coming from the, I guess it would be the west. We would basically spot lock right here and we would pitch back into them. The other thing we would do, which I like to do a lot, I would basically get parallel to that spot. You know, like if the spot's right here and this would be the windy side of it, a lot of times I'll try to set up over here too, so I can keep that back of the boat kind of swinging around and marking fish as I'm fishing, and then throw my slip bobbers forward of me and let them drift back through the zone. So that's kind of the couple of different ways you would want to fish that spot. The other thing you could do is pitch jigs real short. You know, you wouldn't have to take your jig and just throw it as far as you possibly can, but you take a 1/4 ounce jig in this kind of 10, 13 foot depth, throw Kalin's jerk minnow on there, snap it around through there. You know, if it's too thick and you just keep getting hung up on it a lot of times, you know, it's definitely a slip bobber type of deal. And a lot of times we will cast slip bobbers out and they'll just get hung up right away, and we'll just cast it out, throw it out, cast it out, throw it out, until we kind of find that little drift in there where that bobber keeps catching fish. So, you know, in this image here, this is one that we see quite a bit. Before the weeds get up too. You know, obviously this was captured in the middle of summer, but this lake does not have a ton of weeds, and we're just targeting these little patches of milfoil stuff on these bigger sand flats like this. And even in the middle of summer, you know, 90-degree heat, flat, calm, sunny, there are fish up in that stuff on some lakes. So, and obviously it's super easy to run side imaging when you have a lot of sand like this and you're fishing these little bit of weed tufts. So that's what I'm seeing in that picture. A lot of water that has absolutely no potential at all, and a very small chunk of water that's holding fish and weeds as well. So hopefully that was beneficial. We're gonna go straight into number 3 here. Give me a second. All right, we need to go view, slideshow. All right, so here we have a kind of a similar picture. You're seeing basically the boat drove directly over this big weed bed right here, super thick. And I'm assuming that that is probably milfoil. If you see a weed bed that is that thick like that, it's almost always gonna be some kind of junk weed or milfoil. And fish do relate to milfoil. A lot of people think milfoil is bad, but limited amounts of milfoil are good, especially in a lake like this that doesn't have a lot of shallow water weeds. So in this image here, I'm gonna assume that this side of the boat is shallower because we have more weeds going this way. That might not necessarily be the case, but you can see here the fish are sitting actually outside of the weed bed in this one. These are all probably walleyes, maybe a smallmouth bass in the mix, but you can see these weeds probably go out a little bit farther than what I'm showing them right under me. So basically what you would do here, you would basically drop a waypoint on the right on the outside of this weed bed. A lot of times what I like to do is kind of drop a waypoint like right here, drop a waypoint like right here, because you can see a couple of fish up in here, and maybe throw one out there. Then I've kind of got, I'm not necessarily waypointing the fish, I'm waypointing the outer parameters of where those fish are holding. It's a pretty small area, it's kind of overkill to do that, but a lot of times it'll give you a better idea of what you're looking at. And then you do the same thing. You could snap jig these things. They're so concentrated right here. This is a lot of fish for what I normally see, and how, especially on a side imaging shot for in the Hayward area. Sometimes we'll see more, but this is a pretty good looking spot to me. So it's a pretty small area that has a lot of fish in it. So again, we're either gonna pitch jigs to them, or we're going to cast a slip bobber or something real stationary like that, where we don't have to keep a bait moving for extremely long ways to get bit, because these fish are in basically a very small area relating to a very small piece of structure. This is looking 65 feet to the right and 65 feet to the left. So these fish are kind of in a very small area. It's not like we got a ton of fish here, here, over here, over here, where we can just kind of fan cast around. It's this very small area that's holding fish just on the outside of a weed bed. So we'll move on to the next one. This was also an 80-degree water day, so it must have been middle of summer. We'll move on to number 4 here, see what we got. All right, this picture is a little bit more to take in, right? So we've obviously, you look at our sonar shot here, a super weedy, looks like perch infested area. Where you can see we're on some kind of break. We're not all the way out to the weed edge yet. So the way I'm interpreting the sonar is that there's a lot of bait in these weeds. It's probably super windy out because we're getting this, which is generally the boat kind of going in the wind like that. It's summertime for sure. And if we're looking for fish, you're looking at this side here. I'm not really seeing a lot over here. This looks to me like the deeper side for a couple of reasons. Number one, you start getting some dark area over here, which generally indicates a softer bottom, either the outskirt of that break where it flattens out, kind of the more basin-ish part of the lake. The other thing is we have super thick weeds here. You can kind of see here's a pocket of weeds, and there's actually a pod of walleye sitting in that pocket of weeds right there. And that's exactly how you see them set up quite a bit. This is super, super dense weeds right here. Super dense, super dense. You can see it showing or throwing that big black shadow behind it because the side imaging cannot read through it. And then we have more weeds picking up kind of right where the boat's driving through right now, right here. And then right in this little pocket, we've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 walleyes. This is kind of a good one right here. You can see him. He's marking real hard off bottom. You don't always get that real hard, bright white return. Most of the time it's the shadow that gives it away. But you can see there's a nice pocket of walleyes right in those weeds, right on the edge right there. Now I'm not seeing a lot for walleyes like right here, or right here, right on the outskirts. This is another scenario where you're probably going to be fishing something that doesn't move a lot. A slip bobber, pitching a jig short range. And this basically you just plop a waypoint right there and kind of pitch back to him, pitch back to him, pitch back to him until you get him to bite. And, you know, I always get asked, you know, like, well, how many fish do you fish for? You know, if this was like, if I drove down a 100-yard stretch and this was all I saw right here, I would leave the spot. But, you know, if I can find 4 or 5 different little pods like this on a 100-yard stretch, then it's kind of worth, you know, a lot of times you'll pitch into one, catch 2 fish, go to the next one, maybe catch none, go to the next one, catch 1 more, and then you can kind of circle back to the first one, and a lot of times they'll be set up back on those sweet spots and you can start catching them again. So that's what I'm seeing out of that one. A lot of real thick weeds. Might there be walleyes right in the thick weeds? Yeah, but there's definitely walleyes right in this little pocket here. And a lot of times once the weeds get up super heavy in the summer, we don't see or catch a lot of walleyes in the thickest of thick stuff. We catch them just right on the clean edge like that. And that's basically a picture that I see a lot when I'm fishing weed walleyes up here, really all summer long. So we'll jump to number 5 now. And this looks like a very different image as well. So what we're seeing right here, I'm going to look at the sonar first. So we have a big obvious fish right here, right? And it's kind of, the other noticeable thing is that this is on a lip, right? This is probably the most noticeable thing about this picture. This image is not showing a ton of fish, but it's showing a lot of good structural elements, right? So you can see we got, we'll start over here, I guess. You can see we got kind of this rolling hump ridge complex. And it's actually, you can tell this is not like a very wide spot because I got my side imaging set at 65 feet side to side. and I'm starting to get into dark bottom on both sides, which generally means it's probably coming down that break like this. I would imagine my boat is driving right over the top of this ridge right now, and it's looking down side to side, and I'm marking rock close to me here and here, and then a little bit farther I'm out into the basin of the lake, or that softer bottom. So what we're looking at here on sonar is obviously a fish, and it's right on a little knob. So this knob is about halfway back in my sonar history, right? If I was marking it right here, that would mean my boat's over the top of it right now. So we're marking it about halfway back in my sonar history. So I'm assuming that that spot is probably right here, right? So what you would want to do is basically drop a waypoint. You know, you'll have to pan over on your sonar like this. So most of the time on Humminbirds, your right side will be your active pane. So you go menu, select active pane, and you'll scroll over to the left side of your graph. You're gonna want to drop a waypoint right here. That waypoint's gonna pop up approximately right here. And you can kind of assume that that ridge probably runs a little bit like this. Anytime you see these lips like this, walleyes love that kind of stuff. So a lot of times you can kind of come back, drive around this area, and there might be more fish right here, there might be more fish right here, right there. You can kind of tell that's the spot that has the most character on the spot. But on-side imaging, unless there's just a million of them here and they're kind of relating to the soft bottom, you're not going to mark a whole lot of fish on-side imaging in this kind of really hard gravel type rock stuff. It's much more of a sonar thing when you're looking at this. So, you know, there's only one fish that we can visually see right here, but I'll bet if you were to drive around this zone here and this zone here and kind of through this, that there'd probably be more than just one mark there. And at that point, you'd probably flip over to split screen down imaging and sonar to kind of get a little bit more out of that spot. So like I said, in this image we're using almost side imaging to find the sweet spots, sonar to find the fish, and then we can kind of go back and further inspect that spot. So we'll keep moving right along. I have to cough so bad. All right, another very different shot here. Hopefully the variety is good. So this image here, obviously we're in 46 feet of water right now. Now I'm never fishing 46 feet of water for walleyes that are on the bottom, because I just don't fish that deep for walleyes. But what we're looking at here is obviously suspended mark 30 feet down, right? There's kind of a real faint whatever mark right there. But you flip over to down imaging here, and this is why I always run split screen. We're going boom, there's a fish right there. Maybe a little fish right there. Another fish right there, that's probably that fish. Another fish right here, which is not marking at all, right? So this is the reason I like to have a split screen sonar down imaging, because sometimes you'll get a mark on one that you won't see on the other, and vice versa. So the other important thing to note is the depth of these fish. None of them are at 15 feet, none of them are at 45 feet, they're all right at 30 feet. So this is not gonna be a slip hour thing, this is not gonna be a cast a jig thing, right? This is open water trolling, and that's exactly how you want to see them. You want to see them all at the same depth, because that means that you can run all your lines at the exact same depth, you know, as opposed to having to stagger stuff like, are there fish 17 feet down, are there fish 30 feet down, and stuff like that. So basically, if I'm seeing something like this, I'm either trolling bottom bouncers or spinner rigs, open water on snap weights or bottom bouncers or inline weights, or I'm pulling cranks. When I'm pulling cranks, it's going to be something that goes pretty deep, or that I can snap weight down to this 25-foot zone. If I'm fishing clear water and I'm putting baits 5 feet above a fish, that's perfectly fine for me. So I'm going to be running, you know, 180 to 100 feet on a 1 ounce weight, and you know, the crankbaits I'm running are probably going to be Rapala tail dancers, bandits, and deep flicker minnows to get them down in that zone. So good explanation of why you want to run both sonar and down imaging, and basically how I would fish for those exact fish. Picture number 7. We'll see what we got here. So a lot of stuff going on here. This is a rock hump for sure. Now a lot of people would look at something that's cluttered and be like, what in the world is all this stuff going on? So the question I always ask is, people like point at something like this and they'll be like, is that a fish? Is that a fish? Is that a fish? Is that a fish? This is stuff that you cannot catch. It's too small. It's either just clutter in the water or it's like minnows or something, right? But most of the time when I'm saying like I'm seeing pods of bait, it looks something like this right here, or this right here. This one's not coming in that good on the down imaging, but on the sonar you can see it's coming in good. And it looks like a cloud of bait for sure. You look over here, flip it to down imaging, and you see all the little individual speckles. Now you start looking at this rock hump here, and we're coming up the side of it, pretty steep hump. little knob, and this is generally what you would call like the sweet spot on the spot. And you can see the fish on the spot are definitely relating to it. It's so cluttered up. Either we went over the spot really fast and it didn't mark well, or it's just got a lot of character to it, one of the two. But you can see there's definitely fish relating to it, and the down imaging definitely picks them off better than anything. Now, this is the kind of spot where, you know, it's probably going to be something that you're fishing in a very small area, because, you know, you come back, you waypoint this sweet spot right here. You get upwind of it, you pitch slip bobbers back to them, pitch jigs back to them. I always get asked why I do so much slip bobbering. I think it's probably the most effective way to cover a very small area of water. You know, when you start honing in on finding fish, you know, I'm not talking about covering a big flat to try to find a few fish. I'm talking about finding the exact pod of fish and then fishing for that pod. I think that's the reason I use a slip bobber a lot, is because a lot of times I'm confident that I can get my bait within feet of fish when I drop it. And it's a lot of times it's more effective than casting a jig. Now in northern Wisconsin, we don't have a lot of spots that are so big and there's so many walleyes roaming everywhere that we can just fan cast all over a spot and catch roamers. Most of the time, most of the fish on the spot that we fish for are in very small little pockets like this. So this would either be a slip bobber or short pitch a jig type thing, or a Acme hyper rattle or a jig and wrap, something like that, something you can drop right onto these fish and catch them immediately. So that's what I'm seeing on this spot. We got some bait, we got some fish, we have a rock hump, and a little sweet spot knob right there. The more efficient you get at looking for these little knobs like that, or the sweet spots in the spot, you guys are going to be much better off at locating and catching fish. So we're going to go on to number 8 here. All right, what do you guys see here? Oh, this was the trick one I put in. There's that. Mitch was going to do this with me, and then he decided not to. But there's actually nothing on this. It's literally just sand. I'm not sure why I even took a screenshot of this, unless I accidentally did. But there's literally nothing here. So we'll go to the next one. It would have been funnier if Mitch was here and I started telling him I was seeing walleyes. Let's see here. All right, so here's the next one. We have a gravel hump. This is not big chunk rock for sure, but it is a very hard bottom. It looks like gravel. I mean, that to me is probably rock like that, maybe like that at the biggest. Most of it's not that unique though. But you cruise over this with sonar and it does not look that impressive, right? Not much going on here. You look at it on down imaging and you're like, okay, there's 2 fish right there. There's maybe a fish right there. There's a fish right there for sure. There's probably a couple fish right here that we might just be off to the side of. That fish is essentially that fish, which doesn't look like anything. This mark right here is this mark right here, which is actually 2 fish. They were probably just off to the side of them on sonar, and down imaging happened to pick them up a little bit better. That mark right there is that, and these are just pretty much not marked. I'm not sure what those are, but they could definitely be fish. It's definitely a spot that warrants going back around. So you can see this hump is pretty much all on my graph here, so it's not like a huge hump. I can definitely cast from break line to break line on this hump. And this is the kind of spot where it's, you know, it's more spread out. There's not really one sweet spot where I'm gonna cast something like a Kalin's jerkman. I'm gonna throw it real far and work it all the way back across that hump, snap, let it fall, snap, let it fall. Take a few casts. You know, I see something like this where there's a fish here, fish over here, fish over here. I'm assuming you can cut this hump a number of different ways. You know, you can drive over it like this, drive over it like fish, and kind of you can see at this 20-foot depth ring, that's kind of where the fish are set up. So these fish obviously don't want to be up there at 15 feet or 16 feet. They're kind of holding in that 20-foot zone. So they're probably around the parameter of that whole hump, or they definitely could be, because for this one pass over the hump, you can see that they were kind of on both edges like that. So this is a little bit more of a cast something out and work it back scenario. Or you could kind of loop it around it again and see if there's a spot where there's a little bit more fish holding on one corner of it or something like that, and fish a slip bobber or a Lindy rig or, you know, kind of whatever. But you can see the difference between sonar looking like trash and the down imaging looking great in this image. So, you know, always something to do. And a lot of times if you do only run one graph and you always want to have your map open, which you always would, and you always want to have a sonar open, set your hotkeys. So one is sonar GPS, your next hotkey going down on your helix is sonar down imaging, and your next one going down is GPS and side imaging. So that way you can go real quick, you drive over with sonar, you're like, what's that? Pop it to down imaging hotkey, and right away you're gonna see that there is some fish here. So that was kind of a little bit different peek at something. So for our last one, we have image number 10 here. and this is a little bit of both. So we've obviously got some 18 feet deep here. It's obviously summertime. I actually took this one on our Red Cedar Lake video, right? So here is definitely fish right here, right? Tough to tell what they are, but if you flipped over to down imaging, it would give you much more clarity. Now, a lot of times you just drop a waypoint right there, or want to drop a jig and wrap on there without looking at the side imaging. You start looking at the side imaging over here, and you're like, oh, okay, there's a fish right there, there's a fish right there, there's a fish right there, there's a number of fish off to the right side of my boat. And a lot of times, like if I'm fishing and just running this and I'm fishing vertically for those fish, and all of a sudden I start seeing them over here, you're like, oh, we got to pitch over that way or slide the boat over just a little bit. I mean, these aren't really far enough to move the boat over, but if we were marking them way off to the side on a 100-foot scale, then we'd obviously have to move the boat over to probably fish for those fish. But definitely more fish right here, and you can even see some fish probably relating to this hard to soft bottom line over here. There's definitely one right there. There's probably one over here. And the one thing to note about this spot, which I'm glad I remember to talk about, is you don't see like a big rock ledge right here. You don't see like a big weed cluster right here. You're not really seeing any of that stuff. So these fish are probably roaming, right? There's a lot of times I'm talking about where like I'll see fish and I'm like, oh, it's not worth fishing for those ones right now because they're not somewhere where they're going to be sitting still, right? And that was the deal with these fish. They were not sitting still. There's no definable sweet spot there that was holding fish in these spots. This was a big, long, kind of flat, kind of tapering hump like this, and they just kind of run around it. Is there some spots where they'd go more often than others? Yeah, but these fish were constantly on the move when they're typically not on something that's like a definable sweet spot. So, when you see something like this, always kind of make a mental note of that when you see fish somewhere, like, oh, are those fish going to hold there? Is there a sweet spot there where we can go back and say like, oh, these fish always relate to this rock corner? In this case, there is nothing here. And a lot of times what you do when there's no definable sweet spot is you're fishing something that covers water. On this day, what we were doing is we were fishing spinner rigs, and we were pulling them down this long break line, and we'd get to the end and we'd turn around and come right back through it. And that's how we were picking up a lot of these fish. It wasn't a super fast break. We were fishing right here in 18 to basically 20 feet of water and catching walleyes. And it's always something to make note of is, where are those fish? How are they structured? How are they sitting? And stuff like that. So I don't know if I have much more for you guys there. I mean, if you see something like this, always worth dropping a jig and wrap or a slip bobber if you got something ready. But more times than not, if you see fish relating to like just nothing, that they're always going to be on the move. So always make note of that. So, well, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully that was beneficial to you. I kind of like walking you guys through this and looking at some old screenshots. So yeah, drop some comments below if you guys like this. Drop some comments maybe on pictures if you want some questions answered and stuff like that. Otherwise, I'm glad we could film a video today without having to go in a boat because it's absolutely horrible out. So thank you guys for watching, and please subscribe, and we'll see you next time.